Welcome to the Oral History Podcast, which features stories from the oral history website voicesofoklahoma.com, where Oklahomans have given generously of their time to tell their life story for present-day listeners and for the generations to come. Our entire collection is available at voicesofoklahoma.com. By subscribing to our podcast, you will be notified of new Oklahoma oral history podcasts. So now listen to another interesting storyteller from voicesofoklahoma.com.
For those who remember the television show Shindig, but may have forgotten the host, this story will remind you of the very talented Jimmy O'Neill, who was from Enid, Oklahoma. He started his radio career at 16 in Enid, then on to WKY Oklahoma City and KQV Pittsburgh, before making his Los Angeles debut at the brand new KRLA in 1960. The station had just adopted a top 40 format. At the age of 20, Jimmy O'Neill had the most popular program in his time slot, making him the youngest person ever to have a number one show. Jimmy was 24 when he hosted Shindig, which was on ABC television from September 1964 to January 1966, and for a time ran twice a week. Besides the Beatles, among its list of superstars, Shindig featured The Who, the Rolling Stones, Sam Cooke, the Beach Boys, and the Righteous Brothers. Jimmy was also the owner of Pandora's Box, an influential Sunset Strip music venue in West Hollywood, California. Jimmy eventually left Los Angeles for KOB in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and then WOW, Omaha, Nebraska, where John Erling worked with him at WOW and KOIL. Jimmy was 73 when he died January 11th, 2013. For Jimmy's story, John interviewed Jimmy's former wife, Eve O'Neill, whose brother was actor Troy Donahue. If you search the web for Jimmy O'Neill, you'll find examples of his extraordinary work. Listen to the Jimmy O'Neill story on the Oral History website and podcast, voicesofoklahoma.com.
Today's date is April 8th, 2021. So, Eve, would you give us your full name, please?
Eve Irja Johnson O'Neill.
Johnson, are you Scandinavian, Norwegian, or Swedish?
Swedish, and throw in on my that was on my mother's side, the Fredricksons. The Johnsons are German and English, and there's a little bit of French in there, too.
Oh, okay. And I am recording this from my office and studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And where are you as we record this?
I am in Oxnard, California, which is in Ventura County, about 20 miles north of Malibu on the coast.
So I recently discovered a book titled Voices on the Wind, Early Radio in Oklahoma by Gene Allen. And on page 96, there's a photo of Jimmy O'Neill. And it's at a KGWA live broadcast of the 1958 home show in Enid's Convention Hall. And the caption says that the DJ, Jimmy O'Neill, a high school student at the time, went on to work at WKY in Oklahoma City and stations in Pittsburgh and Los Angeles before becoming the MC of TV's Shindig. Well, it turns out he was born and raised in Enid. And I worked with him in Omaha, Nebraska, and while I may have known he came from Oklahoma, I really hadn't pursued that fact until I read this book. Now, Jimmy died January 11, 2013, and he was 73. So, Eve, you and I are going to tell the story of a very talented radio personality and how he got his start in his hometown of Enid. So, Eve, as they say, in the interest of full disclosure, Jimmy is your former husband.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked with Jimmy in Omaha for several years. I was in Omaha from 71 until 1976. So somewhere in there, Jimmy came to Omaha, and I worked with him at WOW and KOIL. He was a colleague, but also became a friend. And so with that aside, it will give some insights that perhaps others may not have. But a bit about you. Where were you born?
I was born in New York.
You were born in New York, and then you grew up in New York?
Actually, I grew up on Long Island, about 50, 60 miles from Manhattan. And it was on the South Shore of Manhattan, very bucolic, lovely area, very flat, lots of farms.
And your parents, who were they?
My father was a film producer who was working for General Motors in public relations, and he would film training films and documentaries on behalf of General Motors. And my mother had been a model and an actress who retired and raised my brother and me.
All right, and their names, your mother and father's names.
My father was Frederick Merle Johnson, and my mother was Edith Dorothy Fredrickson Johnson.
All right, and then how many siblings did you have?
One sibling, my brother Boy, who later became Troy.
And your brother's name was Merle?
Yes, it was Merle, but nobody ever called him Merle. We all called him Boy because he was entranced with the Tarzan's son named Boy.
Oh.
So we went from Boy to Troy. It was very easy.
His name then was Merle Johnson. So we haven't said Troy's name. What was his stage name?
Troy Donahue.
And so we're going to hear names during this interview that we could go down those paths a long way, but we don't have time to do that. But tell us a little bit about your brother Troy. What did he do? Who was he?
Okay, well, my brother was 9 years older than I was. So he was always the most popular boy in school when it came to the girls. And we lived in a small town. The high school and elementary were all in one building. And girls used to come and find me at lunchtime, and they would feed me candy and all kinds of chips and things to get me to talk about my brother. They would ask me questions. Who did your brother talk to on the phone last night? Who is he dating? Who is he interested? Who does he talk about? And I remember one day looking at a magazine that was unlike any magazine I had ever seen in our house before, which was mostly Town and Country and New Yorker magazines like that. Well, this was an early copy of a movie magazine, and they had Marilyn Monroe in it. And somebody explained to me that these were movie stars who were adored by lots of people and were in movies. And so I looked at my brother and I said, "You're going to be a movie star someday." And everyone laughed, and that was it.
Right.
I guess I'm a little prophetic.
Yes, very, very prophetic. And then we'll jump ahead because there's so much we could talk about Troy. But one evening, I understand he was spotted at a diner in Malibu by a producer and director and arranged for a screen test. And it was unsuccessful at that time. But
well, the reason it was unsuccessful was the day of the screen test. The night before, he was coming back from the bar with a friend, and he drove his little red MG Classic off a cliff on the Malibu Canyon Road. And they had to pull him out and take him to the hospital. And so he missed his screen test, but he was okay. He recovered from that.
So then we jump way ahead, and he got his big break when he was cast opposite Sandra Dee in A Summer Place. And then he was in the Western TV series such as Colt 45, Maverick, Sugarfoot. And he was going to be cast in Splendor in the Grass, I see, but missed out to Warren Beatty.
Right. And that's the reason my brother walked out on his contract with Warner Brothers, is they had him in one sudsy movie after another, and he didn't want to do any TV. They forced him into that. And Jack Warner himself had promised Troy the lead part in Splendor in the Grass, opposite Natalie Wood. Well, Natalie Wood started dating Warren Beatty, and she wanted to do the film with him. And so my brother missed out on working with director Ilya Kazan, very wonderful director who would have taught Troy a lot. And Troy was so furious with Jack Warner that he walked off Warner Brothers lot and never went back.
But I understand that Warner Brothers actually put him in a TV series, which really catapulted him in the minds of Americans. He was in Surfside 6, which
Yes.
one of several spinoffs of 77 Sunset Strip. And then he was also, another one was Hawaiian Eye. And that's where isn't that true, where he really became the big star
Right.
in America?
Right. He was not on the show very often, but his theme was on the show. They showed him during the credits. But he was uncooperative about doing TV. He was forced into it, and he would show up very sporadically, and it was not a good thing.
And then one more tidbit about him, because we got to move on, is that in 1974, Francis Ford Coppola cast him. He had a small part in The Godfather Part 2 as the fiancé of Connie Corleone.
Correct. And a fun fact about that is my brother had gone to New York Military Academy with Francis Ford Coppola. And so I had given Francis a part in the senior play, even though he was a sophomore at the time. And so Francis did a turnabout and cast Troy as Merle Johnson in Godfather 2.
He was married a few times, and I suppose the most famous person was Suzanne Plachette, who was an actress, not married that long, were they?
No, they dated for 2 years, and I think they were married for 4 months.
And some will remember her from Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds and in other TV roles. She actually died in 2004, and she was 70. So about Troy then, how old was he when he died?
He was 65.
65 years old, yeah.
He was in really good shape. He was on his way back from the gym when the heart attack hit him, and he just stumbled inside and asked his fiancée to call the 911, and they were there within 3 minutes and got him to the hospital. But it was such a strong heart attack that they just really couldn't save him.
Yeah. What a shock it had to be then for somebody who was in such great shape. Did you and Troy remain? So I know you were 9 years apart, but did he pay attention to you and family, or how did we remain close?
Troy was the world's best brother. And when we were kids, all his friends had dogs. Well, he had me. So I would trail along with the dogs. And I was very welcomed by his friends. I must say, I really appreciate that now that I'm older. They let me tag along, and when we all played football, they were very kind to me and didn't tackle me, but let me score some touchdowns. And Troy taught me how to swim and sail, and he was a wonderful, wonderful brother. He'd call me all the time and say, let's go to the beach, or you want to come to the studio today? And, he'd pick me up at 7 a.m. and we'd go off to an adventure.
Wow, that's great to hear, Eve. It's nice to know that about him. Then what about Jimmy O'Neill? How did you meet Jimmy?
Through my brother. And in fact, I had gone to Jimmy's first wedding reception, and he introduced me to somebody there. He said, if this marriage doesn't work out, little Evie's next. And I think it was 14 or 15 at the time. We all just giggled and laughed, and that was it.
Were you known as Little Evie, or did he just make that name up for you?
He just described me as Little Evie.
Right, and little did he know then, right?
Yeah. No, Little Eva was somebody else.
Right. So Jimmy was married, I think, 3 times, and married to songwriter Sharon Shealy, we might talk about her again. I do notice here in my notes they refer to you as socialite Eve Johnson, and you were right. And then to Renee Whitman O'Neill, and then he had one son, James. That was with you, right?
Correct.
And unfortunately, we called him Little Jimmy. He passed away how many years ago?
3 years ago.
And I think from cancer?
Yes.
And then there's a daughter, Katie, and then a stepson, your children, Robin and Megan, correct?
Correct.
Right. And I remember Robin and Megan. I guess little Jimmy too, but that's sad. That how old was little Jimmy when he died?
He was a very young 47.
Mm-hmm.
Like my brother, he was very handsome, very charismatic. Everybody loved him.
Yeah.
He had a good life in his 47 years.
Yeah. Jimmy O'Neill, then. He was born January 8th of 1940, and in Enid, Oklahoma. Enid is 70 miles north of Oklahoma City. And as I recall, you could not take your Christmas tree down until January 8th in honor of his birthday. Is that true?
That is correct. It was not only Jimmy's birthday, but it was also Elvis's birthday. So we kept the tree up as a tribute to them.
And he was very proud to say it was Elvis's birthday as well, wasn't he? Huh?
Very, yeah.
Okay, Jimmy's parents, mother and father, name and a bit about them.
Okay, his mother was an artist, and she really did a lot of things. She was also a hairdresser there in Enid, and she had quite a clientele. And she was also an artist that painted under her maiden name, Gladys Roberts. So she became Gladys Roberts O'Neill. Her husband was also a James O'Neill. They
were divorced early in the life of Jimmy.
Very correct. Before James was, or before Jimmy was a year old, they were divorced.
So then he was raised by his mother. Then what about his father? Did he ever connect with him and meet up with him ever?
Yes. As a 19-year-old, he met his father for the first time.
How did that go? Did Jimmy talk about it? Of course, I suppose he did.
It went well. His father was working out here in California and had a lovely wife. And they had a nice little ranch house in South Oaks. And we used to go out and visit them sometimes.
So then his mother, Gladys, is it fair for me to describe her as a stage door mother?
Yes. She sent Jimmy away to a school in Florida when he was maybe 7 or 8 years old. And he used to spend all year in Florida for years, going to school and touring with this choir. Now, Jimmy learned how to play the piano at this school, and he was very good at it. And so among the touring that they did, they went to play at the White House when Truman was president. He was very proud of playing for Harry Truman.
Yes, I can imagine. And he would have been quite young, too, 10, 11 years old, perhaps?
Yes.
So that Apollo Boys Choir, that was out of Florida. And his mother said, how many years would he have been going to school in that school?
I'm thinking it was maybe somewhere around 6, 7, 8 years.
And interesting, she would send him there. This is a child. And as I see pictures of him and then knew him in person, he was a very charismatic man, very good looking, had a lot going for him. So, I mean, she obviously spotted that in him and wanted him in that school to train him because of she spotted that talent early on. You know, sometimes we are proud of moms and dads of our children and we say, well, they're the brightest in the world when they really are not. But in this case, Jimmy showed that kind of ability, as you've just said, 6, 7, 8 years old, and so she wanted him in that school.
Yeah.
But didn't she also send him to Hollywood to live with a couple and didn't the audition?
Yes. and they lived in the Los Angeles area, Pomona, actually. And he got a job at KRLA radio, and he became very, very popular on the radio. I used to listen to him, and there was an age difference between the two of us as well. He was about 5 years older than I was. So while I was still in high school, I was listening to him on the radio.
Yeah, but let us take him back here. The way he got into radio, he started in Enid, started hanging around the town radio stations, I understand. And
Yes.
KGWA was a station. As I understand, the students took over the local programming for a day, and Jimmy led off the 7 o'clock news, and the manager liked his newscast. I don't know if Jimmy relayed those kind of details to you or not, but he hired Jimmy, and by the time he was 16 years old, he was a night disc jockey. That was in 1957. And,
Great.
and then at 17, he was earning $200 a week, and then he went to WKY in Oklahoma City. And that's when he came across the song Poor Little Fool, which was coincidentally written by his future wife, Sharon. And he created a demand for it so big that to this day, it is Ricky Nelson's biggest hit. So here he is, 16 and 17 years old, already at WKY. But then he jumped to Pittsburgh, a major market on KQV, and he was making $300 a week. And then by that time, Jimmy was 19, and he did the morning show. Did he talk about this part that I'm visiting with you about?
A little bit, yes.
Yeah.
I had forgotten the details. You have a much better memory than I do.
Right.
But, yes, that's all correct.
And he was the youngest disc jockey in Pittsburgh to be ranked number one. So there we see this track where it eventually led him. And then his Enid program director came up with another job for him, and this time it was in California. And then that put him on KRLA, which you've already referenced, and there he was there. So that by that time he was 19 or 20 years old, and he was there from 1959 to 1962. Then he moved to KFWB from 63 to 67. So as you said, you remembered listening to him because it was rock and roll music, right?
Yes, it was.
And Jimmy told an interviewer that when he went to KRLA, all the new disc jockeys were put on test shows, and the manager fired everybody, but of course, Jimmy O'Neill. And he was the first voice heard on KRLA when it switched from country western format to top 40. And it quickly became the powerhouse radio station up there. The station went up with Jimmy. Sales of recordings he favored went up, and then launched him into television and into Shindig, which obviously we're going to be talking about. Interesting how you listened to Jimmy. I don't know if you were a big fan of Jimmy on the radio or not, or you just heard him, or how it worked with you.
Oh, we just keep our radios on KRLA. We didn't listen. We didn't, move around from station to station. We just kept them on there and left them. Later on, it was the KFWB. When Jimmy was working there at KRLA.
Let me come back to Sharon Shealy, because there's an interesting story here, and we could do more on her as well. But she wrote, as I said earlier, Poor Little Fool, and she was a girlfriend of Eddie Cochran, and she co-wrote Cochran's hit Something Else. And she wrote for Richie Valens, Del Shannon, and many, many others. And then there was an automobile accident that many will remember in 1960, where Sharon and Gene Vincent survived the crash but took the life of Eddie Cochran, and that was in 1960. Then in 61, she married Jimmy, and they divorced 5 years later in 1966, and she died in 2002. I know you were a former wife, but did you ever meet Sharon? Were you around her?
Oh, yes, I was around her, but before I was married to Jimmy, and after I was married to Jimmy.
I guess they remained friends for some time afterward, as you remained friends too, right? So then let's get into where he's already a big-time disc jockey, personality in Los Angeles. Then he gets involved with a nightclub called Pandora's Box, which was a nightclub coffee house on Sunset Strip in West Hollywood. It was at the center of the Sunset Strip curfew of riots in 1966, which we'll talk about. Now, Eve, I believe you went to Pandora's Box, right?
Yes, I did.
Tell us about what you observed there. What kind of a club? How did it operate?
It was a small club. It was on the corner of Crescent Heights and Sunset, so it was right in the heart of what people consider Hollywood. And they had music there all the time, live music. And it catered to teenagers. No alcohol was served there. No food, just drinks. And it was just before the beatniks came in, and everything was very, very 50s there. And I remember seeing the Beach Boys playing there almost every time I went. The Beach Boys were playing, and Leon Russell was playing piano. It was a fun place to go.
Yes. Let me insert here that Leon Russell is an Oklahoman. He was born in Lawton and, of course, lived here in the Tulsa area and had his recording studio, the church studios. People from Oklahoma listening to this very well know him. And, of course, Leon was a great studio musician and then became obviously a big star himself, but you remember him there. But then as you went, that was before then you'd ever was introduced to Jimmy, I believe. He came into ownership of that club, right? And how was that? Did he put money up against that, or was there a group, or how did that work?
No, actually, he was a part owner by appearing there, and he would often, introduce the groups there. So he was regular fixture there. And he didn't own a great deal of it. Most of the club was owned by the people who had started it.
Okay. But they used his name and his personality. And so, okay, I didn't realize that. He was a big presence in the club and introducing people.
Yes, it was known as Jimmy O'Neill's Pandora Box.
Okay, all right. And so artists, like you said, the Beach Boys and the Byrds, Sonny and Cher. Do you remember any other people that might have been there?
I don't. I was going to boarding school, and I would just get to go, a couple of times a month. And it was a go-to place when I did come home for the weekend.
Where was boarding school?
That was in Pasadena.
But then it became kind of an eyesore or an earsore to that area. Loud music, traffic congestion. It's one of the busiest intersections in the city. And then they established a curfew at 10 o'clock. And the young people perceived this as an infringement on their civil rights. And for weeks, lots of tension and protests. And then one day, one of the Los Angeles rock stations announced that there would be a rally at Pandora's Box. As many as 1,000 people showed up, including Jack Nicholson and Peter Fonda, who was handcuffed by police. And it forced the closure of the club. Opened on Christmas for one night. Stephen Stills performed For What It Is Worth, which is a song written in response to the riot, and Buffalo Springfield had a hit of the song in 1967. So there's, and then I should finish this by saying, in 66, the Los Angeles City Council voted to buy and demolish the club. It was demolished early in August 67. So would you remember then how long Jimmy hung with the club? Was it through to the end of it?
I don't know, but knowing Jimmy, he probably hung with it till the end. Yeah. And then they demolished the club. The club was no longer there. Nothing has ever been built here.
Oh, really? Nothing at all? That's interesting.
No, it's just pavement.
It's become sovereign ground, I guess, right? Holy ground.
It's become part of the street. It was in a fork where Sunset met the beginning of Crescent Heights. And so what they did was they just paved over it, and it became part of the road.
So this is all happening. Let's do the age thing here for Jimmy. He's 21, 22, 23, 24 years old. And he's making some big-time money. This is pretty heady stuff for this kid, I'm going to call him, from Enid, Oklahoma, who was tracked by his stage door mother to be a star, and he became a star, no question about that. So then there are those who say to Jimmy, I guess, you should be on television. And voila, there happened to be a television show that was being created called Shindig in 1964. So let's talk about Shindig. First of all, you remember watching it before you even were introduced to Jimmy, right?
Oh, no. The first time I saw, I met Jimmy, I was like 14 or 15. I knew him. I would see him around. This was, I was in New York going to college when Shindig was on. So I would see it, but I wasn't close to LA or what was going on here at the time.
All right. Well, a little background on Shindig is it's interesting because so many people watch that of a certain age, I will say, Eve. And there was a pilot of it was made. It wasn't taken by executives of any of the TV channels because it had such a hard edge to it. And Jimmy couldn't get it sold. He was going to leave LA, and as I understand, Sharon talked him out of it. Then Chuck Barris of The Gong Show, then an ABC executive, he reignited the pilot, and then the show ran from 64 to 1966. And a new pilot was a new cast of artists, which starred Sam Cooke and others. It actually, I found out it was interesting. You remember Hootenanny? And,
yes.
And that specialized in folk music, which went down the tube in 64 with the Beatles and the British invasion. So Shindig became a replacement for Hootenanny, and it was on half hour every Wednesday evening, then expanded to an hour, and then it split in two for Thursday and Saturday nights. So it was a major hit for Jimmy. We had people like Jerry Lee Lewis, Sam Cooke, Chuck Berry, Tina Turner, the Beatles. And let me say this about the Beatles. The Beatles couldn't come to Los Angeles to be on the show, so Jimmy and the whole crew took the whole show to London, and that's where they recorded the show. And I think they did a number of shows from over there. Did Jimmy talk about Shindig to you and some of the people that perhaps that he met?
Yes. I know he was very fond of some of the dancers. He was friends with Bobby Sherman, and Glenn Campbell, he said, was one of the nicest people you could ever meet anywhere. And he was a semi-regular on Shindig.
Jack Good was the creator, but it lists here Jimmy was the writer, so, and of course the MC. So not only did he MC, but he wrote it as well, and that shows you more of the talent of Jimmy. He opened each show with "Howdy Hi, Shindiggers. We've got a shindig that's so far in, it's out of sight." That was his opening. Did you meet the Righteous Brothers?
Yes.
And
yes, I met the Righteous Brothers actually in Omaha, Nebraska, when they appeared for a show there. And nice guys, very nice guys.
Yeah, Bill Medley said of Jimmy, he said Jimmy was the perfect guy to host the show. He wasn't slick. He never tried to be too hip. He was just the perfect guy to hold all that together. I should say, for those of you who would like to see Shindig, you can go to YouTube and key in Shindig, and you immediately see, I think, the first show they did and others as well. But you'll see the complete show, and you'll see, obviously, Jimmy there to see what he looked like and what kind of a performer he was. And there were on Shindig celebrity guests like Patty Duke and Douglas Fairbanks Jr., Vincent Price, Raquel Welch, Orson Welles, and then musical guests. Oh my, there's a long list. Everly Brothers, Aretha Franklin, Freddie Cannon, as you said, Glenn Campbell, Mamas and Papas, all these that Jimmy, well, I don't know how well he got to know them, but he certainly was around them. So any more people that you can think of that he may have commented on, or how he talked about maybe the Beatles?
Yes, and he had a good time with all of them. There wasn't really one person that he ever worked with that he said that they were uncooperative or hard to get along with. I think people that are successful in the music business tend to be a nice group of people where they get along and cooperate and work well together. And I remember they used to spend off times together too. And when Jimmy turned 21, a close friend of the family, remained friends with our family for 65 years, he put together a birthday party, 21st birthday party celebration for Jimmy that included my brother, Troy, and Shelley the Beers hosting it at the home of Jan and Dean. So it was at their home in Bel Air. Sam Cooke was there. Ella Fitzgerald was there. Dinah Washington. And a funny story, my grandmother, who was 83 at the time, was at the party. And she was sitting on a couch flanked by Ella Fitzgerald and Dinah Washington. And there was a rumor that some narcotics officer undercover was at the party. And I don't know what happened, but when my grandmother looked in her purse after we got home, she found a baggie of something that looked like oregano. She wondered how that got there.
Well, I can only see Jimmy laughing and smiling and just drinking that all in. That was so Jimmy, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. And to hear Sam Cooke playing the piano and them all singing Happy Birthday. I mean, what a night to remember.
Okay, he was 21. And you were there because of Troy.
Yeah.
Again, little did you know, right?
Yeah, I was about 15.
Yeah. And then Jimmy, and you talked about Troy being so good to you, but Jimmy and Troy, as being related through marriage, they became friends too, didn't they? Beyond just being related.
Yes. They were not close friends, but, they would be very happy to in each other's company when they bumped into each other at parties, or, they each had each other's phone number. So if they wanted to invite them to something, they would do that.
Jimmy and Shindig were depicted on the Flintstones, that animated sitcom, Shin Rock a Go-Go in 1965, and Jimmy played the part of Jimmy O'Neill Stone.
Yes, that was great fun for my son. He was so proud of the fact. I think he was prouder of the fact that his dad was a Flintstone than of anything else that his dad ever did.
Understandable. Yeah, right. Shindig was canceled in early 1966. He told the Chicago Tribune he tried to burn his house down, literally set fire to his house. He was 26 years old, never had a bad break. He's talked to you about that. What do you know about that?
I know that he was awash in drugs and alcohol. What kind of drugs? I don't know. I know they weren't the heaviest drugs. They were like uppers and downers and things like that. But when you put them with heavy drinking, it was not a good mix. And he just couldn't cope with his marriage ending, his not working and all that good stuff, not working at what he wanted to work anyway.
Yeah, and he was away from the business for a couple of years. And then that's when he went to work at KGWA, because I think it's interesting you point that out. He actually was on the lam, probably because of drugs and alcohol, for well over a year. But then he sobered up, and then he did go back to work and working at KGWA from 1969 to 71.
Right. I was married to him by then.
You were married as he went to KGWA?
Yes.
All right. And you lived there for some time.
We got married in 1969. And I worked for him for about a year before we got married.
You worked for him? What did you do?
I helped set up venues for some of his clients. He had a group that he managed called Stark, Naked, and the Car Thieves. And they were very good. Mostly they played locally. They would play Arizona, San Diego, of course, LA. And they were excellent. He had a few other groups too. Can't remember the names. Beautiful offices in West Hollywood, and that's where I worked.
And after Shindig, yes, he did have drugs and alcohol, but then he went to work and formed this promotional company, but then gave that up to go back into radio. Where were you and Jimmy married?
Tijuana, Mexico.
Why Tijuana?
He said he would never, ever get married in the United States because of the laws.
Because of the law?
Of the marriage laws. If you get divorced after getting married in the United States, his chances of having to pay alimony made him decide he would never get married in the United States.
Well, then your marriage license was seen as good in the United States then, right?
Actually, yes. I was working for an attorney by then. I had him look at it, make sure it was legal.
He's working then in Los Angeles at the radio station there, but then he leaves, and so do you now. Both of you leave, and you move to Albuquerque, New Mexico. Why did you move to that radio station, KOB? Why would he go from Los Angeles to Albuquerque?
Well, he wanted out of LA because we had just gone through the Northridge earthquake, and it actually shook us out of bed. And there was some damage to our home and possessions, and it just scared him so much that he wanted out. And he told a friend, and his friend told him about a job in Albuquerque at a large station there, KOB. He had the afternoon show, which is what he wanted. He didn't want any more early morning hours.
I don't know how long he worked there. How long did you live there before?
2 years.
2 years. All right. Then someone by the name of Tom Barsante from WOW Radio in Omaha had worked in Albuquerque, had heard Jimmy, and then he recommended Jimmy to Steve Shannon, who was the manager of WOW, right?
Correct.
Then I had been working at WOW. Then Jimmy came on and did mornings at WOW and really, I'm going to say, electrified the radio station. I went to KOIL. I was fired by WOW for telling a joke about Blue Cross and Blue Shield, which I'm happy to tell right now, and which I have told on KRMG here in Tulsa just to see if I'd get fired again, and I wasn't. And I told the joke about Blue Cross and Blue Shield. They didn't increase its rate simply because they were out of town, and it just slipped their minds. Well, Blue Cross Blue Shield on WOW was one of the biggest accounts. I don't think Steve Shannon cared for me much anyway, and he fired me. And then I went to KOIL, ended up doing mornings, and then Jimmy was hired away by KOIL in Omaha from WOW, and then there was a non-compete story there. That was a big thing in town, wasn't it, Eve?
Oh, yeah.
And there's a big fight, and they didn't know if WOW had actually fired Jimmy because he was calling in too many times, and you would have to call Tom Barsati and tell him, well, Jimmy can't make it, right?
Right.
And then they say they fired him, where Jim and Sam Holman at WOW said, well, if you fired him, then you can't enforce a non-compete. And so that actually that went to court, didn't it?
Yes, it did. I remember it was very, very tense courtroom, and luckily they ruled in Jimmy's favor, so he could go to work for Coil.
Right. So I'm in the morning, and then he's in the afternoon. That should have been flipped around. He should have done mornings, but he, as you said earlier, he was tired of getting up and doing that. And I'm grateful, because if they'd put him in the mornings, I'd have been fired before that, long before he. But Jimmy and I then were friends at KOIL and at both radio stations. And so, and then we could say that if people are still with us listening to this and interested in radio stations, KOIL eventually was taken off the air. For on January 31st, 1975, the FCC denied license renewals for the entire star station groups, which of course included KOIL. And the FCC said it found serious misconduct of star stations. The commission found that Don Burden was intimately involved in and had knowledge of the misconduct, and that the owners must be held responsible. So early then, on September 2nd, 1976, the star stations went off the air by order of the FCC. And then at KOIL in Omaha, Gene Shaw told his audience during the final moments, "It's been fun, it's been a good time." The last words on the mighty 1290 were recorded by star station president Steve Shepard. KOIL wishes to thank all of the people who have enjoyed and depended on this radio station for the last 51 years. We are now leaving the air for an indefinite period of time by order of the FCC. This is KOIL Omaha. And KOIL's last song was The Sound of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel. KOIL went silent at 12:01 a.m. And I was listening, Eve, and it was an eerie, eerie feeling. And we should add that Don Burden died. He was 56 years old. He died in San Mateo, California, May 12th, 1985. It was after a year-long battle with lung cancer. And so, you know, you think about things that happen in your life. That was the best thing that ever happened to me, because then I discovered a job in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Sam Holman was the program director at KOIL and had been a personality at WABC in New York. And he knew people at Swanson Broadcasting here in Tulsa, and he told me to contact them because they were looking for a morning man, and he knew Gary Swanson. And so I got the job in '76, and here I am to this very day. So that worked out very, very well for me, because I ended up at KRMG, the #1 station in the town, and I couldn't have landed on my feet in a better position in all of Oklahoma. And it was wonderful, and it's been wonderful to me ever since. But this is not about me. This is about Jimmy, right? Right.
Well, I enjoy talking about you too, John, because you're one of the nicest people I know.
Well, thank you. But you were too. And eventually, I think Jimmy did an ad agency, and then you went with him back to L.A., right?
No, he left for L.A. and forgot to tell me he was leaving.
Oh.
So my brother called me and he said, "Do you know where your husband is right now?" And I said, "I assume he's at home." And he said, "Nope, he's on an airplane. He's on his way here." Jimmy called his ex-wife, Sharon Sheely, and told her he was leaving Omaha and me, and was coming back to LA. I had no idea what he was going to do, but he just settled with her for a few days, partied, and then when he sobered up a little bit, he went over to my brother's. And my brother was drinking too, so Jimmy started staying with my brother, and they became roommates. And first my brother got sober, and then Jimmy got sober.
That's good.
And we both went to AA. Yeah.
Good to hear that. So then, did you file for divorce in Omaha?
No, we had to get a divorce in Mexico.
Oh, of course. I forgot about that.
So he saw to getting the divorce. I didn't have to do anything.
Well, then, here's Jimmy back in Los Angeles. So apparently, Eve, when Jimmy decided to go back to L.A., he was not afraid of earthquakes.
It had been a while since they had one. So, yeah, I guess he thought that it was safe.
And he doesn't stay away from the radio station. He needs to earn some money. He goes back to KRLA from 1984 to 1985, Then he drops out from there. I don't know what he did after that. Do you know?
He was working with property owners and helping rent out apartments. But he wasn't an apartment manager. It was more than that. But people that didn't want to be bothered with their properties but owned them, he would manage them for them. But I mean, it was a lot of properties.
But then he went back into radio and KRLA from 1990 to 1993. And then I believe that ends his radio career, because then he retired then somewhere in the mid-90s, right?
Right.
And then he died 5 days after his 73rd birthday.
He was very contented, even though he wasn't making a lot of money. He still lived well in West Hollywood. He had an apartment there which he shared with his daughter. It was a very nice place. So although he didn't have the affluence that he had earlier in his career, he was contented and happy, and he was also working on some radio projects, and he thought he'd put them on the internet, but unfortunately, or fortunately, he died while he was working with someone on that. He died in his sleep. And I say fortunately because it was an up period in his life, and he was doing things that he was looking forward to and happy doing.
All right. So then he died January 11th of 2013 at 73. And what was it? A heart attack took him?
Yes.
I was taken with this because when I was around him, I didn't realize he was from Oklahoma. And then I realized as I learned more about him, he was from Enid and was there and left, a few years after high school, and so talented as a young man. And I didn't know that whole story about him until later in time, and particularly now as I've done this research on him. But he was the most talented, most charismatic person that I had ever worked with. And he was always enjoyable to be around and smiling, somewhat witty, but I don't think particularly a comedian, but he could laugh and cut up with anybody. But it was just his presentation, and I was so taken with that. And, Eve, I learned a lot from Jimmy, particularly his use of the phones for opinions. He did a lot of polling. Call me now on such a topic, and on music, could be anything else. I'd never heard anyone use the phones the way he did, so I learned a lot, and I brought that right with me here to Tulsa, Oklahoma, so I'm indebted to him for that.
Well, he would be honored to hear that, John.
What I find fascinating is he never talked about his days in Los Angeles and Shindig radio. He never talked about those days to us and the staff.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
And he may have talked to some, but man, as much as I was around him, I never ever knew that about him. So I found that interesting too. Well, I'm glad I could help tell Jimmy O'Neill's story because of his Oklahoma connection, and this young man was born to be it. Now, what could he have done beyond what he did? We don't know, but I'm glad to know that you felt he was contented at the end of his life, right?
Yes. He always spoke very, very well of Oklahoma and Enid in particular. He said the people were wonderful there, and he just had a lot of good memories that he conveyed.
All right. Well, Eve, we never thought we'd be doing this, but we did it. And together we wanted to lift his name in front of Oklahomans and how talented he was. So I appreciate you doing this, Eve, very much. Is there anything else that we should add to this story?
Well, I just want to say that Jimmy was very, very fond of you, John, and you were a really good friend, and I want to thank you for that. And you've been a good friend to me as well as to Jimmy.
thank you, Eve. I enjoyed it. And let's get together in Tulsa, okay?
Great. Thank you, John.